Without warning, they appeared one day in the east. An unknown tribe from an unknown land. Masters of the horse and the bow, they struck as swiftly as an arrow, robbing, burning, killing, passing over the land like locusts. In the 5th century AD, they swept across the plains of Europe to the gates of Rome itself, the horsemen of the apocalypse. For 100 years, the rumble of hooves in the distance heralded the horsemen of the Huns. Where they came from or why, no one knows. They rode out of the steppes of Central Asia, but to the Christians of Europe, they seemed to arise from nowhere.
They're without fixed abode, without hearth or law or settled mode of life, and keep roaming from place to place like fugitives.
Warrior nomads they were, roaming with their herds and flocks, perhaps driven from their homeland, perhaps searching for greener pastures. Living on horseback and out of their wagons, they traveled in bands a few hundred strong, grazed the land, and passed on. If they spied an enemy, they would dash in, strike, then flee, only to reappear elsewhere and strike again. If attacked, they could build a fort in an instant by circling their wagons. Late in the 4th century AD, moving ever westward, the Huns reached southern Russia, a land of fertile pastures, and the land of the Goths. A Germanic tribe, considered barbarians by Christians, the Goths in turn were pushed west by the Huns. One barbarian chasing another. Whenever Goth met Hun, the outcome was the same. From a distance, the Huns would let loose volley after volley of arrows.
They were everywhere before they were least expected, for by their speed they outstripped the rumor of their approach. They spared neither religion, rank, nor age. They showed no pity to the cry of infancy.
Armed with spears and swords, the Goths were forced to charge. The Huns would fall back, seeming to flee in defeat. When their pursuers were nearing exhaustion, the Huns would suddenly wheel their horses and strike.
A race of men hitherto unknown had arisen from a hidden nook of the earth, like a tempest of snows from the high mountains, and was seizing or destroying everything in its way.
As bands of Goths sought refuge behind Roman borders, word spread of the new barbarian from the east.
Every day unrest, every day new reports of misfortunes, every day new blows, nothing but fights. The east has been carried away into captivity, and nobody lives in the destroyed cities.
They made nothing, built nothing, left nothing behind. No monuments, no chronicles, only desolation. But in the records of their enemies, the deeds of one ordinary warrior who did extraordinary things survive. His name was Edico.
Having effected the greatest deeds in war, he was excellent in military affairs.
Without their horses and their prowess as horsemen, the Huns never would have ridden into history. The young Edico went from the cradle to the saddle.
Scarce has the infant learnt to stand without his mother's aid when a horse takes him on his back. You would think that the limbs of man and horse were born together, so firmly does the rider always stick to the horse. Any other folk is carried on horseback. This folk live there.
So wedded to their horses did the Huns seem that some enemies believed they could not walk.
By night and day, every one of that nation buys and sells, eats and drinks from their horses, and bowed over the narrow neck of the animal, relaxes into a deep, dream-filled sleep.
Their ponies were a rugged breed, well adapted to heat and cold and long hours of toil. In art, the Huns celebrated the horse along with the livestock that sustained them. The horse was transport, sustenance, currency. It could be bartered for goods, for the Huns did not farm. They traded with the booty of war. At 3, young Edico had learned to ride. At 5, he had learned to hunt with the bow. At so young an age, he was marked with the look that would frighten his enemies.
They cut the cheeks of the males with a sword, so that they are compelled to learn to endure a wound.
Edico learned not only to endure wounds, but to inflict them. No weapon could match his own, the Hunnic bow. It was a reflex bow. When strung, it bent back upon itself, giving it more tension than any bow of its time. A warrior could kill a man at 80 yards and fire an arrow 3 times that distance. No other archer could send his arrows so far, so fast. The bow gained its power from both its reverse curve and its layers of material. The core, usually of birch, would be shaped and seasoned until it gradually acquired 2 curves. Animal sinew was then glued to one side. Pieces of horn, carefully cut, lined the other. Sections of bone gave the bow yet more strength. Reinforced with so many layers, the bow could be drawn farther than any other, without breaking. It took weeks to make, as the bowyer waited for the wood to season and the glue to dry. If it was broken, its strength could never be restored. A marksman on horseback, the Hun was untouchable, unstoppable. Christians whispered that the Huns were devils sent to curse the earth. No devil was more feared than the one called Attila.
He was born to shake the races of the world, a terror to all lands, who in some way or other frightened everyone by the dread reports voiced abroad about him.
Attila's first triumph was among the Huns. He united the wild tribes, then rallied the Germanic peoples they had conquered. He settled his followers on the plains of the land now called Hungary. But the Huns could not settle down. His unruly subjects craved gold to buy wheat, metal to forge into weapons, pastures to graze their herds. Their allegiance could be bought, but only with unending plunder. For the Huns, life was a cycle of war. In the middle of the 5th century, Attila set his gaze on a rich prize, the Eastern Roman Empire. Edico answered his king's summons, and the Hun army crossed the Danube and galloped south, blazing a path of destruction. Belgrade was razed, then Niš, then Sofia. The Huns campaigned not to occupy, but to destroy. Ahead, people fled at their approach. Behind, few were left alive to pursue them. For Edico, it was a campaign of glory. Proving himself in battle, he was made bodyguard and advisor to Attila. With Rome's legions away fighting another barbarian tribe, the Vandals, no obstacle impeded the Huns. Not even nature could slow them. In their wagons, the Huns carried pontoons to pass through marshes and rafts to cross rivers. By 447, Attila's army had penetrated the heart of the Eastern Empire. In late spring, they threatened the opulent city of Constantinople. Theodosius, Rome's emperor in the east, sent out the legions that were left to him. Near Constantinople, the Huns attacked.
They enter the battle in formation, while their medley of voices makes a savage noise. And as they are lightly equipped for swift motion and unexpected inaction, they purposely divide suddenly in scattered bands and attack, rushing about in disorder here and there, dealing terrific slaughter.
Into the broken ranks of the Romans, Edico led a charge, and the Huns unleashed another of their weapons. Skilled at catching horses and cattle with the lasso, the Huns now put it to use on men. By evening, the ground was littered with Roman corpses. The Emperor Theodosius had no choice but to sue for peace.
The Huns surpassed in their greatness all the forces of the Romans. They were the masters, and the Romans the slaves.
The shrewd Attila conscripted the ablest of his captives, such as engineers, into his own army. The rest were sold or enslaved. Then he sent Edico to Constantinople to demand tribute from the emperor. For his defeat, Theodosius paid a heavy price, an annual tribute of 2,000 pounds of gold. In return, Edico promised the Huns would leave the empire in peace and Constantinople untouched. Amazed by the splendor of the imperial court, Edico in turn received an offer himself. Seeing his awe, a Roman minister promised that if Edico would murder Attila, he could return and wallow in luxury for the rest of his life. Edico pretended to accept the offer, then reported it to Attila. The king of the Huns was outraged. But he vented his fury in lands to the west, untouched by invasion. and unprepared. In 451, the Huns crossed the Rhine and stormed into Gaul, in what is now northern France. Riding unopposed, they scorched the land and put the people to the sword. The Roman commander summoned allies from all over Gaul. In June, he mustered an army on the northeastern plains, across from the undefeated Huns. Wearing an iron helmet and elaborate leather armor, Edico took his place among the Hun elite. Around him, his comrades displayed the wealth of nearly a century of victory. Weapons and equipment stripped from the vanquished. Alongside their cavalry, the Huns now deployed foot soldiers, drawn from the Germanic tribes they had conquered. Edico saw the armies were well matched, and not only in numbers. After years of defeat, the Romans had learned from the barbarians. They borrowed the Huns' tactics and their bows. On the eve of battle, Attila made a sacrifice. He peered at the streaks in the bones and sought omens of the battle. The next day, thousands would fall. At dawn, the Romans were deafened by animal howls. Then, lightning struck.
Hand to hand, they clashed in battle, and the fight grew fierce, confused, monstrous, unrelenting, a fight the like of which no ancient time has ever recorded. There, such deeds were done, that a brave man who missed this marvelous spectacle could not hope to see anything so wonderful all his life long.
The battle raged, hour after hour, into the afternoon and night. For the first time, the Huns had met an army that would not flee. Foot by foot, the Huns were forced back to their wagons. Tens of thousands remained on the field, where they had fallen. The omens foretold the night before were true. With the survivors, Attila slipped away toward the east. It was his first great defeat, and his last. Within 2 years, he died, not on the battlefield, but in bed, in a drunken stupor. Without Attila, his empire collapsed. His generals warred among themselves. His Germanic subjects rebelled. Edico fought on, defending his new homeland against old enemies, the Goths. In 470 AD, Edico died as Attila should have, in battle. Within a generation, the sound of wild ponies and wilder men faded away. The barbarians mingled their blood with tamer tribes. Almost as suddenly as the Huns had appeared, they vanished, leaving few traces of their passage in Europe or in history. Edico's legacy was more enduring than the great Attila's. In 476 AD, the last Roman emperor in the West was deposed. His place was taken by a barbarian, one of his own generals, a warrior named Odoacer, son of Edico the Hun.